am Bob Rigdon, host of the Ghost Find and Plantation Finds YouTube channel. And first off, I would like to ask for your forgiveness for the lighting and the setup. I am using my den as a substitute for a studio due to the COVID safety concerns, which I'm sure most of you all are aware of what's going on in the world today. The plantation that I'm referring to today would be the Richard Eskridge, or the Eskridge Plantation, which was a short 4 miles from the little town of Duck Hill, Mississippi, which I have had the pleasure of visiting several times over the years doing my genealogy research. Several years ago, I had the pleasure of contacting the owner of 400 acres of the original plantation, who gave me permission to search the area whenever I was in the area doing my genealogy research. And I don't need to tell you how excited I am about this particular video from the several other videos I have uploaded to YouTube. The fact being that my wife's grandmother, Eliza Eskridge Crockett, was actually born on the Richard Eskridge Plantation, and her grandfather and great-grandfather were actually slaves on the next door neighbor's plantation, who was Benjamin Campbell from North Carolina. I've done a lot of research into that plantation also, but recently I found out that a company, Weiserhauser, has purchased most of the 10,000 acres that it contained. I would like to, I guess, stress how important it is for more people to get involved in this area of research. A lot of you do strictly the genealogy part, but what about putting a little bit more research time into the areas where your ancestors were actually held in bondage? It makes a lot of sense to me. Someday, even a lot of these plantations will be covered over with asphalt, cement, whatever, in the name of progress. I have found quite a few things there during my trips to that area. And one of them in particular, I will be given a lot more detail with at the end of this presentation. A little bit more info on this Duck Hill, on this plantation thing. Richard Eskridge had, like most slave owners, has a cemetery, but naturally on a back part of this family cemetery was a reserved area for his slaves. But the ironic thing is, usually you don't find headstones for the slaves. The same with his next door neighbor, Benjamin Campbell. He actually had a section of his family cemetery for slaves. And doing my research, I did at least find one mention of one slave, Wesley Campbell, being buried there in 1870. He's the only slave listed in this particular East Cemetery, Campbell Cemetery. But as far as these plantation cemeteries go, there is a abandoned, and I consider it abandoned, Purnell family, which was a large slave owner right there. He was also a neighbor of the Campbells and the Eskridges. His cemetery sits on the opposite side or across the road and down the hill at the highway, right where the Eskridge Plantation starts, at the foot of Highway 51 and goes up the hill. But I had the pleasure of years ago, one of the diner employees at this particular restaurant said at the foot of the cemetery. I mean, sit right adjacent to this Purnell family cemetery. And what makes this cemetery so unique is that there is a large monument, which I have pictures of, and I'll give you close-ups of that, with me standing there. That was actually dedicated to the Purnell family cemeteries during peace and war, the Civil War, of course. And there are several slave headstones in this Purnell family cemetery. But like I said, the diner is now closed, and the cemetery is more or less abandoned, and it sits right on the opposite side of the road from the Eskridge plantation. And the only activity in this area is very quiet, very quiet and peaceful. But from time to time, you will hear the logging operation or trucks passing by when you're actually out there on this land. A lot of the items I found were things I expected to find, like the old coins, etc., etc. But I did find some very unusual things that I give closer details on at the end. Also, I also have a picture of what the Eskridge family home looked like before it burned in the 1980s. Some guy there was renting a place. Can you imagine renting a place that was that old, built around 1936 with slave labor? But he burned the house down with the firewood in the fireplace. Something he was doing wrong, and they burned the house down. But I do have a picture of the original house here, which is pretty exciting in itself. When I met with the homeowner, who is now deceased, so I won't divulge his name for the privacy of the family, but he did live in Clinton, Louisiana. Not Clinton, Mississippi, but Clinton, Louisiana, and he would make that 200 or 300 mile drive just whenever he could get an opportunity to, because when I actually met with him the first time, he was in the process of building a cabin on the property, which he did complete. But a very interesting thing about this home is there were 2 remaining stone fireplaces, and he was telling me some of the history about the house when he pointed something very interesting out about the fireplaces. Embedded in one of the fireplaces was a very large handmade button, and like he was explaining to me how exciting that was, just the fact that that button had to have been embedded in that fireplace when the slaves was actually building the chimneys along with the house back in 1836, I believe. So there's a lot of history there. And Richard Eskridge, like I said, he was a large slave owner. At one point, he owned as many as 80, I believe 85 slaves, the same as his neighbor, Benjamin Campbell. Things found included were something that I just found necessary to bring back just for a good memory, and that's this very large rocks in here. This rock is actually part of one of the original water wells that was right outside the door of the plantation house. And I have a picture, I believe I have a picture here with my metal detector leaning against the water well. But I saw fit just to bring that stone back with the moss over it, covering it and everything because of the age of it. So as you go along with your research, looking for your ancestors, once you find those ancestors, why not take it an extra step and try to dive into what life might have been like on the plantation. You know, sometimes it's easy to get in touch with these ancestors, these slave owner ancestors who still own parts or pieces of what used to be vast plantations. And sometimes it's not easy, but a lot of times when you do your research through your libraries and archives and your city hall record keeping deals, you will come up with some good leads that you can follow up on. So I want to keep this short, and I'm going to get to some of the things that I found here, which is quite a few things here. And I'm going to give you some good close-ups of this slave schedule from 1850, 1860 that was right there in the Duck Hill area. Keep in mind that the Carroll County area, before parts of it became Montgomery County, the Carroll County area of Mississippi was one of the largest slaveholding areas in the state of Mississippi. I mean, quite a few. And also keep in mind, when these slaves were freed, a lot of them chose not to keep the surname of the slave owners. But I'll give you a good example. My wife's grandfather decided to change his family's name from Campbell when they were first listed on the 1870 census to Crockett. So sometime between 1870 and 1880, he changed their family name to Crockett. Why Crockett? We'll never know. Could be because some of his family back in Virginia, parents, grandparents, were owned by the Crockett's. Who knows? Because there was no other Crockett's in the area at the time that he changed his name, black or white. There were no other Crockett's in the area. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give you some good close-ups. I might have to take the corns to better lighten, so I want you to really get an idea of what, not the slaves per se, but the owners and visitors to the plantation more likely dropped over the years. And there were a lot of modern coins found, because keep in mind, people were renting or living in this house up until the 1980s, when the one guy got careless with the wood and burned it down. So chose not to show all the modern day things. I just wanted to focus on the historic items. So without further ado, let's get to it. Thank you. I was saying earlier, the slave schedules are very helpful in any genealogy research. This should be one of the first things you consult before you even get into the 1870 census. Although slaves were not named, listed by name, just sex and age, it still gives you, the researcher, a very good idea of just how many slaves the particular slave owner owned. And here you can see Richard Eskridge here, which at one point he had as many as 85 slaves, the same as his neighbor, next door neighbor, Benjamin Campbell. So, and another neat thing about these schedules is they not only listed how many slaves by age and sex, but how many slave cabins were on the property and how many slaves lived in each cabin. This is Benjamin Campbell slaves. Like I said, my wife's grandfather married one of Richard Eskridge's slaves, Eliza Eskridge. So as you can see, it's Carroll County. And Carroll County had one of the largest slave populations in the state of Mississippi. And this was only a short 4 miles from Duck Hill. Some of the interesting things which I usually find at old sites, so nothing unusual about broken pieces of china or horseshoes, except sometimes it's the quantity of the horseshoes and mule shoes and the quality that might be different. But at all old sites,
you're going to find the horseshoes and mule shoes. And sometimes your railroad spikes if a train railroad track was anywhere near it. And in this case, there was a railroad bed right down at the across the freeway, Highway 51 from the Plantation's gates. Just a lot of broken glass, bottlenecks, oyster shells, and your whole bottles here and there. Every now and then you do get lucky on sites like this and turn up some of your whole your whole bottles. This is one of my favorites right here. This tip proof or safety inkwell, as it was called, patented in 1880. It's pretty heavy. You're not able to really tip it over by accident because of the weight of it. And one of the items here that I need to do more research on is this trunk tag. What I have been able to make out on it so far is the initials of a soldier that was in the 57th Volunteers, which was a colored Civil War unit. Glass bottle stoppers. I always find those. I guess I'd be disappointed if I didn't. Civil War bullets. Which usually turn up. Another item that usually turn up at old sites is your clay marbles, which is from the 1880s, early 1900s. And a lot of just rusty can parts or tin parts. Then you have the old familiar, and one of my favorites, the old silverware. More horseshoes and mule shoes. And this is what remains of a I believe they call it the wagon. It's part of a wagon. I can't remember what they call this. But as you can see, some of the hardware is still attached to it. This was in a trash pit that I stumbled across on the property. This is a black and white, more or less black and white copy of the Richard Eskridge former plantation home that burned in the 1980s while being rented. Unreal. This is the section of the slave section, that is, of the Eskridge family cemetery. And a better photo of the Eskridge plantation house, which was given to me when I first made contact with the now deceased site owner. This is the entry gate atop the hill for the plantation. And this is one of my metal detectors leaning against the old water well. This is the gentleman that worked at the diner and took time out to give me a tour of the Purnell Cemetery that's set at the top of the hill in the woods, directly behind the diner, which is now closed. He also took me to this famous rock where I took the photo, where one of Richard Eskridge's son-in-laws, Cooper Weed, carved his name way back in 1896. Like I said, that's the Eskridge family slave cemetery. Or partner, I take that back. This is actually the part of the family cemetery itself. The slave section was in the back. Always in the back. And we're standing here by the next to the monument that the Purnell surviving children had erected in memory of the slaves during wartime as well as peace times, which I thought was very, very unique. And moving right along, this piece of rock might look like just another piece of ugly rock, but I made it a point to bring it home on my last visit because it was part of the original, one of the original water wells that set, that was right outside of the front door of the home itself. And contrary to what a lot of people picture as plantation homes, like in the TV shows or movies or documentaries of a plantation home sitting atop a hill with huge white columns and all that. That's only at times, and it depends on what state or location the home was actually in. Most of your plantations homes, they were called the big house, with nothing more than, like I showed you the picture of Richard Eskridge's home. Sometimes just oversized cabins with a dog run and 2 or 3 fireplaces. Okay, the coins, I'm going to give you a close-up if I can. Okay, these are half dimes. Those are half dimes with holes, which could have been worn by the slaves or former slaves or even some of the people living on the property. But slaves usually wore their coins or favorite coins around their ankles or neck on chains. These are V-nickels from the 1880s to early 1900s. And I should have mentioned that these half dimes are from 1853, 54, 57. Okay. One of my favorites, although they usually look pretty rough, are these large cents, like from 1845. And I believe I have one from 1851 here somewhere. And this one is from 1808, the flowing hair, 1808 or 1809. A couple shield nickels from 1866 and 1867. And my one and only 2-cent piece from the site itself, 1864, 2-cent piece. And the 1857, the only one from the site with holes, 1857. And this is a very early Barber quarter with no date. I'll take that back. I believe it was 1895. And your old familiar, always around Indian head since 1859, 1864, 1865, 1900, 1901. These are always around to be found. The easiest thing to lose where no one bothered with picking them up. Even in those days, 1 cent was 1 cent. This old buckle is during the Civil War years. I need to do a little bit more research on. Pretty old. Well, I hope you enjoyed the short video. Wish I could have spent more time, but I felt that the shorter, the better. And if you have not checked out my earlier videos, please check them out at Preserving Dallas History through Metal Detecting on YouTube, as well as the video here, Ghost Town and Plantation Finds. So please check them out, and whatever you do, please do subscribe. And as they say in the movie business, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching.